this on? Ah, there we go. Very cool. Well, thank you guys for, I think for one, to the Tinuiti team. I practiced my opener, and I was saying elite SEM in my head 1,000 times, so glad I nailed that piece. Thank you for having us. I'm here on behalf of Quora. I actually lead our East Coast partnerships team, and I think I'm actually uniquely qualified to moderate this panel, because I definitely don't work at the Triopoly, and I have sold against the Triopoly for my entire career, basically. And I think there's a lot of opportunities that come with working with emerging ads platforms. Things like underpriced attention, unique intent, contextual relevance, things that we'll talk about today. But I'm really, again, excited to have 3 marketers to share the stage with me who have very unique backgrounds across a bunch of different categories and verticals that will be able to share their unique experiences on opportunities across some of these emerging ads platforms and what they can do to diversify and what they're doing today to diversify away from the Triopoly. So, to kick things off, I'd love to do a quick round of intros. Madeline, you want to kick us off?
Hey guys, my name's Madeline Parati. I'm a senior manager of analytics on the marketing team at Trilogy Education Services. We're a workforce accelerator that creates and manages skills-based training programs for working adults to ready them for the digital economy. And in my role, one of my big focuses is identifying areas where we are short on leads and figuring out new ways to get them. So there's only a finite amount of people searching for our programs, and we have to find ways to reach them, more push channels to reach them otherwise.
Cool. My name is Rajiv. I am Director of Paid Advertising at PerfectKeto. We essentially sell supplements and health and wellness products that support the ketogenic diet. I've been here for about 6 months. Before that, I was at AppLovin on the sell side in the mobile app space, and before that at a mobile games company. So I've been all over the place in the industry, mobile games and e-commerce and who knows what else. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been a fun ride, and I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
Hi guys, my name is Tatiana Morozova, and I'm a senior manager at MongoDB. MongoDB is a leading NoSQL open source database. We launched cloud database 2.5 years ago, and that's the team I'm working on. And they primarily drive user acquisition and product activation campaigns.
Fantastic. So really to dig into the content today, so 70% of all US digital media spend is actually projected to go to one of the 3. So the Facebook, Google, and if you guys didn't know, it's no longer the duopoly, it is a triopoly. Amazon's commanding about 9% projected here in 2019. But I would say there's all this talk in the industry around diversification. We don't want to hedge our bets. We don't want to be over-indexed in 1 or 2 platforms. But there's been limited adoption, I would say, of emerging ads businesses. What makes you guys different, or what is the challenge that you guys are overcoming, you think marketers are challenged with internally? And Rajiv, you can kick us off.
Yeah. Well, I find the biggest difficulty is selling against a future value of a platform, right? When you pitch something internally, the conversation usually goes which one of our competitors is doing it and how successfully are they doing it, right? And that's most often you'll hear that. So you essentially have to convince management, hey, this is worth investing in and why, which can often be challenging, especially when you yourself don't know if it's going to back out. That's one thing. And the other thing that I find kind of uniquely challenging is the staffing against it, right? So when you have 7 plates in the air, you're managing 7 different platforms, adding another emerging platform can often be difficult because you're going to be the one that has to take on that work. Or someone on your team, and it's going to directly affect you, right? So now you have to think about agencies that can support you, how that additional cost plays into your media spend and your overall performance. And it can be often challenging, but oftentimes obviously worth it. So, yeah.
Similar to Rajiv, selling internally could be pretty challenging, especially if it's a new emerging platform. Nobody knows what the value is, how much money we should be spending. So being able to clearly communicate the value to the executives and cross-functionally is really crucial. And secondly, if it is an emerging platform, which basically means we don't know how to measure success or failure. So you have to have a very clear plan how you're going to measure success and how you're going to validate this test and how much money you're going to spend on it. So having this clarity and being able to clearly communicate to executives, these are the challenges when it comes to emerging platforms.
Yeah. On my end, it hasn't been too difficult to get executive buy-in, but in terms of measuring success and proving that a platform has enough legs that maybe we should actually staff up to have a dedicated manager for that platform after the fact, That's a process that takes a bit longer for us. So it is a couple of months of, testing with 1 or 2 accounts, seeing that it works, scaling it, and then making the case for dedicated staffing for it.
Great. And I will say, you guys are here because you've been successful in your own organizations, like at driving adoption of new platforms. Like, what do you think you're doing differently, or how have you guys gone about approaching adopting or testing new platforms?
So actually, when I started MongoDB, we used only paid search. And the reason why, because our leadership, which is developers by training, they didn't believe in Facebook or any other channels, and they said clearly that developers would never go to Facebook. And then we ran very short Facebook campaign, and we showed amazing results, like overwhelming number of qualified leads. So I think now our leadership is definitely more open to testing and trying new things. And I think the main reason why is just because you have to show the data, you have to build a business case and show how it can be successful. And you can't just stick with one specific or 2 specific channels. So at this point, we actually do have dedicated testing budget, and we continuously invest in new channels, new emerging platforms on a regular basis. And if we don't do this, it's actually considered as a failure for our team.
Yep, and on our end, we've always dedicated test budgets to new channels, but we've also actually recently introduced a role for a director of marketing partnerships. So we actually have someone now full-time looking for new opportunities like that, and I work closely with him to sort of flush those out and prove if they're working or not.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, we've always been pretty platform agnostic. We just want to buy the traffic where it makes sense and it backs out. And I think why we've been successful at it is because we've been able to look at the multi-touch system and basically assess each kind of platform based on where they fall in the funnel, whether there's a first, middle, or last touch. And and we have a kind of a methodology around that in terms of how we should be crediting individual touches. So we find a way to make it successful and back out and assign each platform with goals that make sense based on where they fall on the touch spectrum. But yeah, obviously attribution is kind of annoying, and we can get better at it. But it's been helping us get into the emerging platforms for sure.
Wonderful. And I think what would be helpful for the marketers in the room is just how you guys approach testing. So it's one thing to sell internally the opportunity to get into an emerging ads platform, but to sell that and then ultimately activate against that, that's 2 different things. So I'm curious how you guys approach that internally, maybe some of the nuances to how you're doing that.
Sure. So usually when I start testing a new platform, I'll select 3 or 4 schools, typically ones that are in larger metro areas, so that the population and audience gives us a fair shot at getting decent sample sizes. Mm-hmm. From there, if I see success, then I will start to layer in other schools that are in more remote locations and we may struggle on lead volume. So I basically do it with the the accounts that we know, if this is a good platform, it'll be successful here, and then layer in the places where we actually need the help afterwards.
One thing I will say just about our partnership and how we're working together is this idea that you almost try to prove scale first. And the reason I feel like behind that is you're trying to justify return on time, which is oftentimes a really big hurdle for adopting new ads platforms and new channels. So really interesting, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Steve.
Yeah, often when testing, you want to figure out, okay, let's say I'm new to Pinterest and I want to start testing Pinterest. I already had success on Facebook. Often you want to roll over what works well, like creative, copy, landing pages that works well on Facebook. You want to do that, but at the same time, you want to consider how is this supply different, and what do I need to do differently on this platform to make it work. I think every platform has a secret sauce for kind of scaling it. So that's, I think, definitely an important consideration is how do you transfer learnings, but at the same time be creative based on the platform. But yeah, testing's been, we always allocate a certain % of budget every month to test, just because that's how you find your wins, right? Without doing that testing, you'll saturate eventually, and you'll have issues. So.
To build off of that, it's easy, and I feel like I talk to a lot of marketers that just try to replicate their approach on other platforms. Do you have any opinions or perspectives on how you're working with account teams to understand what the nuances are, how you need to message, or maybe have different creative messaging?
Yeah. I think an important conversation when you're vetting new partners is often, okay, what's unique about your platform? What kind of creative works well? what are best practices, and at the same time, everyone has their little one pager they'll send you, and it's not super helpful. So it's like you have to. It can be helpful, but what you need to do is reconcile that with what you already know from Facebook and what you specifically think. Like, it's a test within a test. You have to basically say, okay, Pinterest is highly visual and highly, this is how the platform is. I want to test recipe videos, and you have to have a thesis and come in and actually test that in order to say, okay, this is going to move the needle on this platform specifically. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and just to add to everything that guys mentioned, I also try to, in a way, manage lower expectations internally because it is a test, so I cannot promise the same low acquisition cost as from Google, which is over-optimized, to Facebook. So I definitely try to position as a test, and usually spend a lot of time in analyzing the results, because a lot of times it's so easy to write off and say, oh, it was not successful, but maybe because it was not successful because you did not set it up correctly, or you didn't spend enough time with account management to understand the uniqueness of the platform. Because creative on Quora is different from Facebook and different from Pinterest. So you definitely need to understand and educate yourself on the uniqueness of the platform, and only then you can definitely say, okay, it didn't work or worked. So in terms of actual measurements, I keep it open-ended and definitely try to get as many insights as I can from the test.
I think you hit on an important point too that I want to double click on, is this idea of like setting expectations and not expecting the exact same performance from a platform or other platforms where you might be investing for 3, 4, 5+ years, where you've already cracked the code. You know what creative works, what messaging works, the targeting tactics to deploy. So that feels like it's consistent across the board, is you guys set expectations for your personal selves, but also internally, so that you can have some wiggle room on finding that next big thing for your business. Is that fair?
Yep, definitely.
Awesome. So I know we had discussed maybe not running through this one, but we do have some additional time. So I'm curious, what is working for you guys today? Are there some emerging ads platforms that you are finding success with? And just walk us through kind of how that partnership's been going.
Yeah, so I could start. One that we didn't have incredibly high hopes for, and has actually turned out to be great, is Reddit. Starting out, we really needed to manage expectations internally because everyone thought, this is display, our leads should not be any more expensive than they are on Facebook. It turned out that they were, but our downstream metrics evened everything out, so our acquisition costs actually turned out to be, quite within the acceptable range for us.
Awesome.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so emerging ads platforms.
Yeah,
I know you've had success with my former employer.
Yeah.
If you want to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think, like I said, where we've had success in emerging ad platforms is just basically figuring out where they fall on the touch spectrum, and then uniquely assessing them for what they are, right? So for Facebook, obviously, you lose a ton on cross-device in attribution, right? On other platforms, maybe it's great for first touches, but it's not necessarily getting the last click very often, right? So these are the we've really taken a unique approach in assessing each individual platform, and I think that's helped before just tossing them out of the rink. And then upon further analysis, what we found in general is these emerging ad platforms are generally just worth investing in. They can often be a little lower scale than the duopoly, in my personal opinion, and that's the results I've seen. I don't know if it's differs for other people. But that's kind of my 2 cents on it. Yeah.
Great.
So when it comes to testing, when we do run a test, and let's say it's not successful, we never just say we're not going to test it again. We usually take a pause and come back to it in a couple of quarters just to see what we can do differently. Actually, with Reddit, we've seen pretty bad results. We've tried different approaches, and it just didn't succeed. We know for a fact our audiences on Reddit, they do a lot of, there's a lot of user-generated content from our audiences. Definitely, we need to be there, but we still try to figure out what's the best way to put our message in there because it's just not successful. We've tried quite a few times. So it's an ongoing process.
Is there anything that is working?
Google.
Awesome. Cool. I think to really just end this session, would love to hear if you guys have any parting words of advice for other marketers in the room, and then we'll save some time at the end to see if there's any questions from the audience.
In my experience, really, it's just about keeping an open mind. Some channels that you think will be home runs won't be, and some that you never would expect to scale actually can. And just setting expectations. When you start out, you're not going to reach, acquisition costs that you would on a fully mature and optimized platform. But if you find that the volume is there, you can always, chip away at price from there.
Yeah, my recommendation would be to think about it the reverse route and do a thorough analysis on your demographic and where you think you can find your demographic. Like people are mentioning Reddit, Quora, these kind of platforms, they really have a unique user base, right? So I think it's, do I think that unique user base fits our demographic, and then is it worth a test? So basically have a thesis around demographically why. And then also, I would encourage a lot of people not to give up on platforms super soon. Like a lot of people will be like, hey, I'll throw 10K at this platform. If it doesn't work, then peace, right? Like that's not the right way to approach it because, like I said, each platform has its secret sauce. There's certain creative copy variants that may pop, and you may see a ton of success. But again, you need a thesis. It needs to have worked for a competitor or for you in your mind or whatever it is, right? So that's the advice.
I guess the first one would be continue challenging the status quo and keep challenging these internal assumptions. That's one. And two, our target audience at Mongo developers, and we have hundreds of developers working for the company. So definitely spend some time with your audience. Don't make any assumptions. Send out survey, create pizza sessions. They love pizza. So try to get as many insights as you can because it will definitely give you more ideas for future tests.
Awesome. So to kind of just replay that and add a couple more thoughts to close things out. For one, just being open-minded about testing new platforms, setting realistic expectations, both internally, but also with yourselves as marketers when you're going in and testing new platforms. Second piece, and this is more, I don't know if we've talked at length about this, but this idea of, and I've talked to a lot of marketers where they go, I'm investing more and more into the Triopoly, but my business isn't growing. And so really focusing on incremental or net new demand versus capturing demand that may already exist through branded search or through retargeting programs. You got to fill the funnel. There's a lot of talk about brand fueling demand. Definitely aligned with that mantra. And then I think at the end of the day, early adopters will win. So really being able to tap into some of these emerging platforms where auctions are not so dense. For instance, with Quora, we have about 2,000 active advertisers. Google and Facebook have millions. And so you can imagine the cost efficiencies that can be driven there. And really partnering with these platforms, their account teams, to identify the nuances and the opportunities for you to tap into as a business. So with that, I want to thank our marketers for joining it. Thank you so much. And we do have some time at the end if you guys do have questions for us. In the back.
For me, a lot of it is just keeping up with industry trends, so attending conferences and knowing what emerging platforms exist, but then also using competitive research tools to see, who our top competitors are getting referral traffic from. We use SimilarWeb.
Yeah, I would say you could start to create buckets in terms of what works well. Under the social umbrella, it could be Facebook, Pinterest. There could be another bucket, Quora, Pinterest. I would start to create these little buckets. That way, if something works well, you know exactly what to try next. An example would be Google search is killing it for us. Should we try Bing search? And should we try, Google shopping works really well. Should we try Pinterest shopping? I think those are the kind of connections that you can start to make.
I think you mentioned Google Analytics referral, which is a good source typically. Our audience, as I mentioned, developers. So there are a lot of different conferences about developers and for developers. So I definitely tapped into those industry-related resources just to try to understand how they think, what they think, how they consume their media. And sometimes, it may not be a huge website and well-known media site, but you can hit on some of those long-tail sites. Sponsored emails, things like that actually make a huge difference for you.
Any other ones? Cool. All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining, and thanks again to our panelists. Really appreciate it.